do we then count nuclear power generation as a global warming measure? If that can be counted, then China will be evaluated highly. But if we say nuclear is not an initiative, then you cannot count that. Then you would end up saying China is not doing much. So comparability is difficult. And also, how do we assess BAU? For the time being, BAU minus 15% should be the commitment to be made by the developing worlds. That's the figure quoted by IPCC. But how do we assume the BAU would result in different conclusions?
I'd like to invite Professor Miranda Shores.
Thank you. Yesterday, Germany had a really sunny day, and it produced in the peak hours enough electricity to cover 20 nuclear power plants just from sunshine. In the last 2 years, 15 gigawatts of new photovoltaic power has been added. What that means is that at the time of Fukushima, Germany was producing 3.5% of its electricity from renewables, not from renewables, from sunshine, photovoltaic. Today, it's already at 5% from photovoltaic. So in 1.5 years, it's added 1.5% of its electricity capacity. I think you can call that a huge success. But what you are reading about in the newspapers is the cost of the feed-in tariff. And I think this is a bit of a warning for Japan, because Japan is also introducing a feed-in tariff. And Japan has a very lucrative feed-in tariff, which is going to help to spur the renewable energy industry. But it will have to be reconsidered in about 1.5 or 2 years' time. Because what's going to happen is, just like in Germany or in Spain before, right now the feed-in tariff for photovoltaics is very favorable. And so there's been massive investment in photovoltaics, and hence the big growth in the PV sector. But it is driving the cost of the renewable electricity for the household user up. So one of the things Germany is doing is trying to rebalance the feed-in tariff. So not so much money goes into photovoltaics and more goes into wind power, which in Germany is the better option. We have more wind than we have sun. But what we've also learned in the last 1.5 years is that sometimes you need to reconsider expectations. Nobody thought we would have so much photovoltaic in Germany, where again the sun doesn't shine so much. I think for Japan, which is now entering the renewable electricity push, what will be really important is making sure that the balance of how much money goes into the different kinds of renewable energy is thought out very well. In terms of the question about what is Germany thinking about cooperation across the European continent to include the Mediterranean area, there are ideas for establishing concentrated solar thermal electricity in the deserts of northern Africa and in southern Europe, and then transporting that electricity to the manufacturing centers of Europe, which are further in the north. That idea is still very important because the energy transition and energy revolution is seen as something that's important for energy security for Europe in the future, and also for improving the potentials for renewables across the whole region. In terms of your difficult question about how do you compare efforts, I think it's maybe important to think about what's the difference between a business as usual trajectory for a country and new plans for changing that business as usual trajectory. I think that Germany's plans are pretty ambitious in terms of changing the business as usual trajectory. I am of the impression that China's plans are not yet changing the business as usual trajectory in terms of the fossil fuel base, but what they are doing is pushing very hard to improve the efficiency with which the economy is operating, and also developing more renewables. And I think in that sense it's a very welcome initiative. The Indian case, or the Indonesian case, I think you can barely compare with China, because there you have also so much need to provide electricity for people and communities that don't have it. But I very much welcome the effort to say, let's start a different trajectory for the path dependencies that are created. And Japan, we still have to wait a few months to see, don't we? Thanks.
Thank you very much. And may I ask Professor Shukura?
I think I'll very quickly touch upon the three connected issues. One was the last question, which was already answered, and I agree with Miranda on that answer. The other question was that the related question that all these ambitious plans are there, and do we believe this would be delivered? And the third question about India, also related to whether all these private cars which are coming in, what will happen? Now, these are all related issues. On this question of who is doing more, well, I would agree with what Miranda was saying, as such that especially in case of India, the 20 to 25% commitment of the intensity reduction is broadly very close to the business as usual, you know. And so if you really, up to 2020, when we look at it, the only thing what is helping us to do, and as I was trying to also argue in my presentation, is that well, 2020 is too short a period for us to start making a big dip into the rising numbers. But the real issue is that whether we can alter the path dependency, and can we try to decouple in some form through the correct infrastructures and other things whose effect in a short run may not be very high, but in a long run this can transit towards a lower path. And so I think this, and I mean I do recollect that I'm one of the authors of this UNEP Bridging the Gap report last year, and the new report which is also going to come up this year. And I think these kind of questions are raised, that who's doing more. I would still say that actually that despite all kind of claims on who's doing more, the developed countries' numbers from the baseline, as Miranda rightly was pointing out, is reducing a lot more as compared to the numbers which are coming from the developing countries. And I think sometimes this is causing sometime a bit of confusion in the developing country policy makers, that they are ending up doing a lot more. Not necessarily, I mean, they are doing a lot in these countries, but I would still say that the real emission reductions are coming from the developed countries, you know. The next point on this car things, you know, and connected with it's very much connected with the infrastructure issue, the public transport, as was mentioned. In India, well, we are paying a great deal of attention to that, but our numbers of the car ownership currently are so low, like it's about 1 in 100. Or something, that these numbers are expected to go up anyway. Now the question is that can we reduce the rate at which these numbers are going to go up? Because there is a certain kind of lifestyle which has been put up in ideological fashion globally, actually, that unless you do not get into a car and get into a long drive, you don't have freedom. Or something, you know. And I think probably we may need to change this. So the car companies are driving this ideology, all things. So I think maybe that there is a big struggle here in the mind of people. What's good, and maybe in India we are still going through that. Our numbers are very small to start with, so I think it may be. I will not say the last word has been said in this, but we might have to do a lot more work on this. And of course, on the other question which was that do we think these plans are ambitious? I would say that these plans are not really very ambitious, what I might find from India, but they are quite reasonable given all the challenges that we have. However, they are reasonably ambitious to position us in 2020 to move towards a low carbon society in India. Thank you.